high in a mountain range that most Americans have never heard of. There lives a creature that looks like it was designed by a Pixar animator, round face, giant black eyes, fur so soft it looks painted on, and rusty orange patches on its head like it fell asleep in autumn leaves. It has been called the cutest animal on Earth. And yet, in the more than 40 years since it was discovered, it has been seen alive by human eyes fewer than 30 times. Not 30 times a year, 30 times total in 4 decades. Today you are going to meet it. And by the end of this video, you will understand why scientists are racing against the clock to save something most of the planet does not even know exists. Let's start with the name because it already tells a story. It is called the Ili Pika, pronounced Ili, not to be confused with a rabbit, even though it looks like a teddy bear crossed with a bunny. Pikas are actually their own branch of the animal family tree, cousins of rabbits and hares, but different enough that scientists give them their own group entirely, called lagomorphs, but specifically the Pika family Ochotonidae. There are more than 30 species of Pika scattered across the mountains of Asia and North America. But the Ili Pika is not just any Pika. It is the largest Pika species on the planet, and it lives nowhere else on Earth except one isolated mountain range in the far northwest corner of China, a place called the Tian Shan, which literally translates to heavenly mountains. Picture jagged gray peaks slicing into thin blue sky, elevations between 9,000 and 13,000 feet, higher than almost every mountain in the continental United States, outside of a handful of peaks in Colorado and California. The air up there is thin enough that humans get lightheaded. Temperatures swing from blistering sun to freezing wind within hours. And somewhere in the cracks of that broken rocky terrain, in the gaps between boulders and cliff faces, this tiny creature makes its home. Here is where the story gets almost unbelievable. In 1983, a young Chinese conservationist named Li Weidong was climbing through this exact terrain on an unrelated survey expedition when he spotted something odd poking its head out from between 2 rocks. A small, gray, round animal with big rusty patches and enormous dark eyes stared back at him for a moment before vanishing into the stone. He had never seen anything like it, neither had anyone else. It took him and his team 3 more years of expeditions, sightings, and careful research before they were confident enough to declare in 1986 that they had found an entirely new species unknown to science. They named it after the region where it was found, the Ili Prefecture, and so the Ili Pika got its name. Now here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. After that initial discovery, the species was studied for about a decade. Researchers estimated that somewhere around 2,000 of these animals existed in the wild during the early 1990s. That already is not a big number. For comparison, there are more polar bears on Earth right now than there were Ili Pikas at their healthiest known population. But then something troubling started happening. Survey teams went back to the sites where the animals had been recorded, and they found nothing, not a burrow, not a hay pile, not a single Pika. Between 2002 and 2003, researchers investigated more than half of the known historical sighting locations and came back completely empty-handed. The species that had just been discovered less than 20 years earlier appeared to be vanishing in real time. By 2005, published research confirmed the population had crashed by an estimated 70% in just 15 years. 70%. Imagine if 70 out of every 100 people you knew simply disappeared within a decade and a half. That is the scale of collapse this animal experienced, and almost nobody outside a small circle of Chinese wildlife biologists even knew it was happening. For nearly 2 decades, there were no confirmed live sightings at all. Li Weidong, the man who discovered the species, refused to let it go. He kept returning to those mountains year after year, often funding the expeditions with his own personal savings when official research money dried up. Think about that for a second. A man spending his own income, hiking into freezing high-altitude terrain, searching for an animal that most of the world had never heard of and that might already be extinct, simply because he could not bear the thought of losing it in silence. Then in 2014, after roughly 20 years without a single confirmed photograph, Lee and his team got lucky. They spotted one, alive, peering out from behind a rock exactly the way the very first one had, more than 3 decades earlier. The photographs made their way to international media and briefly went viral, with headlines calling it a real-life Pikachu because of the uncanny resemblance between this animal's round ears, plump orange-flecked body, and the famous cartoon character that half the planet grew up with. The comparison is not just clickbait. Some researchers genuinely believe the original character design for Pikachu may have drawn loose inspiration from Pika species in general, though the Ili Pika itself was only formally described a few years before the Pokemon franchise launched, so the timeline is more coincidence than direct inspiration. Still, once you see a photo of this animal, you understand exactly why the comparison exists. So, what does this creature actually look like up close? It measures around 8 inches long, roughly the size of a guinea pig or a small rabbit, and can weigh up to about half a pound. Its fur is a soft grayish brown across most of its body, but the standout feature is a set of bright rusty red or orange patches across its forehead, the crown of its head, and the sides of its neck, almost like natural highlights. Its ears are rounded rather than long and floppy like a rabbit's. Its eyes are large, dark, and set in a face that has been described by researchers themselves, not just internet commenters, as resembling a teddy bear. Unlike common Pika species found in North America, which are known for their sharp, high-pitched alarm calls, the Ili Pika is remarkably quiet. Scientists believe it rarely vocalizes at all, which is part of why it is so difficult to track down. Most Pikas give away their location with constant chirping. This one stays almost completely silent, adding to its ghost-like reputation. It is also a solitary animal. It does not live in colonies or complex social groups the way prairie dogs or many rodents do. Each individual tends to occupy its own patch of rocky terrain, using the gaps and crevices between boulders as a den. Like other Pikas, it does something clever to survive the brutal winters at that altitude. During the warmer months, it gathers grasses, herbs, and other mountain vegetation and dries them in the sun, creating what biologists call a hay pile, essentially a stockpile of food tucked into the rocks that will sustain it through months of snow and freezing temperatures when nothing edible grows above ground. Researchers have also found something unusual about its reproductive pattern. A mother typically starts 2 litters each breeding season. But by the time the second litter would be born, her body's fat reserves are already used up from raising the first one. So that second litter is effectively abandoned before it can survive. It is a brutal but efficient adaptation to a habitat with painfully limited resources. And it is part of why this species reproduces so slowly compared to lowland rabbits, which can have litter after litter throughout a single year. Now let's talk about why this animal is disappearing, because the reasons are honestly a preview of what climate change looks like for cold-adapted species everywhere. The Ili Pika survives specifically because it lives at extreme altitude where oxygen is thin, temperatures are brutal, and very few predators bother to follow it. That harsh environment has essentially been its shield for thousands of years. But as global temperatures rise, that shield is disappearing. Warmer weather allows vegetation, insects, and predator species that normally live at lower elevations to creep higher and higher up the mountain, following the retreating cold. Foxes and other predators that historically never bothered climbing that high are now showing up in Ili Pika territory. At the same time, the pika itself has nowhere left to retreat to. It already lives near the tops of these mountains. There is no higher ground left to climb. Researchers have grimly noted that as warming continues, the species is being squeezed toward the literal peak of its range, with nowhere further to go once it gets there. On top of climate change, increased livestock grazing in the region has degraded the vegetation the pika depends on for both food and its winter hay piles. Regional air pollution drifting in from expanding human activity has also been flagged by researchers as a contributing factor to the decline, although the exact mechanisms are still not fully understood, because frankly, almost nothing about this animal's daily behavior has ever been closely observed. Scientists openly admit there are enormous gaps in our understanding of its ecology. We do not have detailed data on its mating behavior, its lifespan in the wild, its exact diet composition, or how it interacts with other species in its habitat, because it is simply too rare and too remote to study properly. Most endangered species at least have research stations, camera trap networks, or ongoing monitoring programs. As of recent assessments, the Ili Pika has no dedicated conservation program of its own, no official protected reserve built specifically around its habitat. It exists almost entirely off the radar of global conservation funding, which tends to flow toward more famous, more photogenic flagship species like pandas, tigers, and elephants. And that is genuinely part of the problem. Pandas, which also live in China, receive extraordinary international attention, funding, and breeding programs. The Ili Pika, arguably every bit as endearing, and arguably in a far more precarious population situation, remains almost completely unknown outside a small community of researchers and wildlife enthusiasts. Out of an estimated original population of around 2,000 individuals in the early 1990s, current estimates suggest fewer than 1,000 remain today, and some researchers believe the real number could be considerably lower given how difficult the species is to survey. The International Union for Conservation of Nature currently lists the Ili Pika as endangered on its red list of threatened species, one step away from the most severe category before extinction in the wild. Population surveys across the historically known sighting locations paint a troubling picture. Of the handful of regions where the species has been documented, it appears to have already vanished entirely from at least 2 or 3 of them. Only one surveyed region, a valley called Baiyinggu in Xinjiang, has shown numbers anywhere close to what researchers would consider a healthy population. Everywhere else, the story is the same: fewer individuals, smaller hay piles, quieter mountainsides. So why does an animal that 99% of people watching this video will never see with their own eyes actually matter? A few reasons. First, the Ili Pika functions as what ecologists call an indicator species because it depends so heavily on very specific cold, high altitude conditions. Its survival or disappearance acts like a canary in a coal mine for the broader health of high mountain ecosystems across Central Asia. If the Ili Pika is struggling, it is a warning sign that the entire alpine environment around it, the plants, the insects, the water systems fed by mountain snowmelt, may be shifting in ways that will eventually affect human communities downstream as well, including agriculture and water supplies that millions of people in the region depend on. Second, there is something worth sitting with about the fact that one of the most objectively adorable mammals on the planet has almost no public awareness, no dedicated funding, and no guaranteed future, simply because it lives somewhere remote and does not vocalize loudly enough, literally or figuratively, to get noticed. It took one man, Li Weidong, spending decades of his own life and money just to keep the world from forgetting this animal existed at all. Since that rediscovery in 2014, conservation biologists and wildlife photographers have made repeat expeditions into the Tian Shan Mountains, hoping to gather more data. But confirmed sightings remain exceptionally rare even now. Camera trap technology has slowly begun to help, allowing researchers to capture images without needing to physically encounter the notoriously shy animal. But comprehensive population counts across its full range remain incomplete. There is also a broader pattern here worth noticing. The Ili Pika is far from alone. Around the world, there is a long list of small, lesser-known, deeply endearing species quietly sliding toward extinction while public attention stays fixed on a handful of famous animals. The saola, a shy forest-dwelling mammal in Vietnam, and Laos so rare it has been nicknamed the Asian unicorn, has been photographed alive only a tiny handful of times in the last 30 years. The vaquita, the smallest porpoise on Earth, found only in a small pocket of the Gulf of California, has a population now estimated at under 20 individuals, making it arguably the most endangered marine mammal alive today. The Hispaniolan solnodon, a strange venomous shrew-like mammal from the Caribbean, has survived largely unchanged since the age of dinosaurs and is now critically endangered due to introduced predators. None of these animals get a fraction of the attention or funding that goes toward pandas, tigers, or elephants, despite facing equal or greater risk of disappearing entirely within our lifetimes. What makes the Ili Pika story stand out is the sheer contrast between how instantly lovable it is, the kind of animal that would break the internet if it had a dedicated Instagram account, and how close it has come to vanishing in total obscurity. If Li Weidong had given up in the early 2000s after years of failed searches, it is entirely possible this species could have gone extinct without most of the scientific community even realizing it in real time. That is how thin the margin has been. As of the most recent published assessments, the Ili Pika remains classified as endangered, with a population believed to be under 1,000 individuals scattered across a shrinking patchwork of high-altitude rock fields in a single mountain range in northwest China. There is currently no dedicated captive breeding program for the species, largely because its extreme habitat requirements and its sensitivity to disturbance make captivity attempts extraordinarily difficult. Its best chance at survival remains protecting what wild habitat is left, limiting grazing pressure in its range, and slowing the broader climate trends pushing warmth higher into its mountain refuge. So the next time someone tells you they have seen every cute animal the internet has to offer, you can tell them about a creature that looks like a cartoon character brought to life, that lives at an altitude higher than most airplanes fly over commercial cities, that has been seen alive by human eyes only a few dozen times in over 40 years, and that is currently balancing on the edge between survival and disappearing forever, largely unnoticed by the rest of the world. The Ili Pika does not roar, it does not have tusks, and it will probably never headline a nature documentary the way lions or elephants do. But it exists right now, today, somewhere in those heavenly mountains, quietly gathering grass into a hay pile, completely unaware that it might be one of the rarest and most precious animals left on the planet. Think about the odds involved here for a moment. There are roughly 8 billion people on this planet, and there are believed to be fewer than 1,000 of these animals left, spread across jagged, nearly inaccessible terrain that almost no tourist and very few scientists will ever set foot on. Statistically, you have a better chance of encountering a wild snow leopard, one of the rarest big cats on Earth, than you do of ever laying eyes on an Ili Pika in its natural habitat. That is not an exaggeration. It is simply the math of a species this small, this isolated, and this quiet. If this kind of hidden, almost forgotten corner of the animal kingdom fascinates you as much as it fascinates us, Make sure you are subscribed because there are dozens more stories like this one waiting to be told about creatures the world has quietly overlooked but absolutely should not have.